Every new Chevy is red tagged with our biggest savings of the season. It's our largest selection of Silverados with 1.9% APR on new Silverado 1500s, Blazers, Equinox, Trailblazers, and Traverse models. Plus, buy with confidence with the Beatty Warranty for Life. For the final month, it's the Red Tag event at Beatty Chevrolet, locally owned and operated for 90 years.
Chris Low, who covers college football for ESPN.com. And Chris, 7 days ago, you were here on the show saying, in the next 3 years, college football is probably going to be unrecognizable. And here we are a few days later, Big Ten, Pac-12 updates, FSU comments. What do you make of the latest conversations and the effect on college football?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, gentlemen. It's good to be with you. I'm not surprised. We've sort of been moving this direction for some time. And I'll start with this. I love how administrators and chancellors and presidents and ADs all say, well, we're trying to do what's best for our student athletes, and we're going to go here and go there, and that's what's best for us. It's best for their pocketbooks, okay? That's what it's. Let's not fool anybody. They're not fooling anybody. It's just, so you're telling me it's better for the Oregon swim team or the Oregon tennis team or the Washington or the Colorado, these teams that are going across country. Imagine that Washington Rutgers baseball game. It's good for these schools because they're going to get more revenue money. And again, I'm using Oregon and Washington hypothetically, okay? USC, UCLA have already made that move. It's good because they're going to get a chunk of that Big Ten TV pie, which is maybe going to approach at some point $100 million per team, when in the Pac-12 they're probably looking at, if they're lucky, $30 million. So you're talking about a difference in maybe $60-70 million. It's always about, as our good friend Ray Moss said, straight cash. So all this other stuff is BS. And I'm not down on it. I think that's sort of where we're all going to move, where we're moving this sport. And 2, 3, 4 years, there's going to be one big super division of college football, I have no doubt, and still might be divided into conferences. And you're going to have the schools that are the haves, and the have-nots will probably play their own tier of football, and you'll have your own playoff. I mean, it's the same stuff we discussed a week or so ago, and these are just sort of more maneuvers. I will say this, Josh, about Florida State. I was interested in just how full throttle they were yesterday and being front and center about their league. Basically their proclamation: we're going to leave the ACC unless we get a bigger chunk of revenue within the conference. It's not sustainable. Well, here's my question: where are they going to go? I've talked to enough people who should know. I don't think Greg Sink and the SEC are sitting there clamoring to get Florida State. I'm not sure that they fit in the Big Ten. So there may be some people who call their bluff, and I'm still not so sure that they can get all that grant of rights. In fact, I would say there's a better chance that they won't than they can. So they may be sitting right there in the ACC disgruntled for some time.
What do you think their line of thinking is in being so vocal and being public with some of their comments? Because we've seen other schools just up and leave without really saying anything, but Florida State has been doing some big talking, some big barking and woofing. Why do you think they're doing that?
Yeah, well, Florida State's different because they, I think, first of all, they'd owe a penalty of about somewhere between 120, 150 million to leave. Ooh. And then there's the grant of rights issue that their media rights are owned by the ACC through 2036. That's a long time, and it's, from everybody that's looked at the contract that I trust in the ACC, someone who's right in the middle of it says that they're very confident that that's ironclad. What is Florida State trying to do? I think they're trying to leverage the conference, bully their way into getting more money, instead of having equal shares of revenue that's spread out among the teams in that conference, that they're going to get a bigger portion because, quote unquote, their view is we bring more to the table from a football perspective. We got a bigger brand. There's more interest in us from a television standpoint. And all that may be true. In fact, I'd say it probably is true. Clemson as well. And I think Clemson's sort of sitting there quietly letting Florida State sort of walk out on that plank and see how it works out for Florida State before they say anything or do anything. But again, I think the biggest thing here is they better have a plan, because I'm not sure right now that they have a landing spot.
We're talking to Chris Low from ESPN.com. Chris, we've been talking about Tennessee's schedule this afternoon. Georgia and Alabama, of course, the two big boys on the schedule with what they've done in college football. What do you think is the third toughest game for Tennessee, with home games against Texas A&M, South Carolina, road games at Florida, Kentucky the week after playing Alabama? What would you say is the third toughest game behind the two biggest?
I think Texas A&M is going to be a really good team this year, and then the Vols get the Aggies in Knoxville, which helps. But I do think they're going to be a load, much better than people think they're going to be. They're just too talented not to be, and they've underachieved. I think the Petrino thing will help them offensively. I think they're going to be really good in their defensive line. So I would probably say A&M. They play at Kentucky, but they just sort of had Kentucky's number. And I do think Kentucky will bounce back this year and be a good team. But much like the Florida-Tennessee series forever, really for most of the last 2 decades, I got to see it to believe it that Kentucky is going to be able, to beat Tennessee. It's been the antithesis of Florida-Tennessee, that Kentucky-Tennessee series. So, I think Tennessee, to me, will be as motivated. Certainly Josh Heupel will be as motivated as he's been all year when South Carolina comes to Knoxville. So I think that's certainly not a game that you're going to catch Tennessee sleeping on. So I would say probably Texas A&M. And I do think Florida, in the swamp, third week of the season, it'll be about 90-some degrees, especially if Florida could win against Utah, which I think they're going to have a hard time doing that first week. That place will be rocking pretty good, and that's really going to be that's going to be the game, whether they beat Utah or not, that will sort of shape their season. I think for Billy Napier, he and his staff know that that's a game that if they lose the second year in a row to Tennessee at home, the SEC opener, that it may be pretty ugly again for the Gators. So I think that will be a hard one for Tennessee too, especially if Tennessee doesn't play well early or gets behind, or that's a close game going into the second half. Then I think that could be a pretty dicey proposition for the Vols.
Chris Low, ESPN, as you look at fall camp for Tennessee, do you have a position battle for Tennessee that you find to be the most intriguing, the most interesting versus the others?
I think the safety position, Swain, and really the defensive back positions, period. I know that Josh and the staff, Tim Banks, feel like they've brought in some good talent. They've got some guys they brought over. They'll be better, especially at safety. I would say the linebacker unit, too. I think Tennessee's infinitely more talented there, deeper, have some guys that they feel better about, some freshmen, some people they brought in to transfer, from BYU. I think both of those two areas, linebacker and the back end, the good news, I think, for Tennessee and Tennessee fans is they feel like they've got more competition, more guys they can play, more guys are ready to play, just more skill, more talent in both of those positions, which means, you're not going to have to rely on the same guys. And as you know, man, when you get on that practice field right now, the rest of this preseason, on into the season, the best thing you can have is guys pushing each other. And I think Tennessee will have more of that in both the back end and the linebacker.
Yeah, Chris, did you catch Josh Heupel's comment after practice number one describing the talent difference, the roster difference now versus 2 years ago? Dramatic was the description, and he repeated himself in that description.
Yeah, and an emphasis on dramatic. Dramatically. Not just dramatically, but dramatically. So, no, I heard that. And, Josh has shared that with me in the offseason. We talked that the thing that the two things, or two of the things he was most encouraged by was that they were going to be able to play more players because they had more depth and more players who had the skill set to play. And then the competition on the practice field that I just mentioned. And he just feels better overall that even though they lose guys like a Darnell Wright, a Jalen Hyatt, and then Hooker, that when you look at your team in totality, in some, they have a lot more players that he feels like are SEC ready, or rise to that level of being players on the SEC level that can be, if not elite this year, but have a chance to be potentially elite.
With what went on at Northwestern, Pat Fitzgerald being let go, and we've seen Kirk Ferentz have his fair share of issues with his strength coach. I mean, all eyeballs are on football programs, and former players can make a complaint, current players can make a complaint, and before you know it, coaches are dismissed. How do you see that changing how coaches kind of move with coaching their football team and trying to coach guys hard and ultimately trying to win football games?
The first thing I would say, Swain, is as coaches, administrators, associate ADs, ops directors, you better be as vigilant as you've ever been within your program, making sure you know everything that's going on in the summers, off-season workouts, what's going on after practice, before practice. I can't imagine that that's not the case all over college football. I mean, you played at that level. I mean, wouldn't you agree that they better have their antennas up like never before? That's the first thing I would say. The second thing is we live in a society now, not just in football, where oftentimes just the mere allegation carries a penalty that you never can completely crawl out from under, no matter if it's 10% true or 98% true. I would say that. And I think we're just in a different – and this has nothing to do with some of the awful allegations, the sexual assault, some of those allegations at Northwestern. That's completely, it's disgraceful, some of the things you hear, if those things are indeed true. And you've got a lot of players coming out and sort of repeating the same stories. Now, some of them are different than what they've said publicly in the past. But what I was going to say is we live in a different era now in football from when I played sports, probably even from when you played sports, of what's acceptable and what's not in terms of hazing, pushing players to that limit. Because, in football more than any other sport, the goal of a strength coach or a coach was to push his players not over the edge, but right to the edge to see what they could take, right? I mean, wasn't that the case with you, Swain, when you played?
That's right.
And they want to know, coaches want to know when things get tough in the quarter and you're down 2 touchdowns and it's 96 degrees and the crowd's going crazy, and you're gassed. I mean, what do you got? Are you the kind that's going to lay down? Or are you going to stand up? But that's a fine line, man, pushing kids to the edge versus pushing them over the edge. Now, again, this has nothing to do, and I want to be clear on this, has nothing to do with some of this sexual assault garbage that apparently went on at Northwestern. I'm talking about pushing kids, running them after practice, running them for punishment. I come from an era where if we played poorly on a Tuesday night in basketball and we got back at 12 o'clock or 11:30 midnight on a road trip, lights are on in the gym, and we're running. We're running, practicing. There's just some things that happen in sports, in practice, the way coaches practice, the way you practice, that just, it's a different era now, it's a different world. There's things that coaches said to players 20, 30, 40 years ago that you just can't get away with now. And it's up to the coaches. The onus is on the coaches to adjust.
Chris, last question before we get you out of here. The gambling stuff that's going on at Iowa State, this seems to be a pretty big deal. Anything you've heard about this could be an issue maybe in other places of college football, different conferences?
Yeah, Swain, if I were an AD anywhere or coach, I'd be pretty terrified right now because, we all were in college once. You played. I knew a bunch of players. I mean, how many players across college football right now do you think gamble in some way, shape? I'm not saying necessarily on their team, but whether it's DraftKings, whether it's fantasy football, betting on a player, how many yards he's going to gain, how many players, what would you say the percentage of players that either do or have gambled on football in some way, shape, or form?
It's scary. I'd be surprised if there's not at least one per team.
I'd say I'd take the over on that.
Yeah.
I'd say 10+ per team who have done it at some point. They may have done it and compliance or coach put the fear of God in them and they stopped. Or maybe they're doing it through their brother's app, their next door neighbor's app. their frat brothers app or whatever, and they're smart enough not to be doing it under their name or their app. But I mean, it's sort of hypocritical, really. I mean, it's hard to watch TV or a game where there's not some gambling and commercial on TV. I mean, you guys see them all the time, right?
Yep.
And I'm not saying it's right. I'm not condoning it at all. I'm just saying that yes is my answer to your question, Swain, that coaches and administrators all over the place should be concerned about this, because I have no doubt that it's going on at other schools.
Chris Low, ESPN.com, as good as it gets, covering the world of college football. Chris, we appreciate the time as always. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, I always look forward to it, guys. Take care.
Thank you, Chris. Chris Low, right.